Welcome to NWAC's first webinar hosted by Project Peace, and I just want to introduce myself is Gail Gallagher. I'm actually First Nation Cree from Frog Lake, Alberta, residing in Ottawa. And what we're going to be doing today is talking about issues of violence and perceptions of safety experienced by Aboriginal women and girls. And I'm going to be going through a PowerPoint slide presentation. There's two separate ones, one for Aboriginal women and girls, and the second one will be for Aboriginal men and boys. So this has been sent out. We can share it after, and it's a very long PowerPoint, so I'm going to try to go over it as some parts will be skipped, but you can read it at your leisure. So as you know, I also want to talk about NWAC as one of the national Aboriginal organizations here in Ottawa, one of the 5. And we've been in existence since 1974, where we represent the national voice for Aboriginal women across Canada, and we work to promote Aboriginal women and girls' rights. And we've been doing that for a long time. And I just also want to recognize the traditional Algonquin territory that we're on. And as you know, NWAC has been working a long time on the issue of domestic violence, and especially on the issue of the missing and murdered Aboriginal women. And that's one of the files that I work on. And I also work with operations officer, finance officer, who's Tanya Dubé. So there's 2 of us that are currently working on Project Peace. And our department name is Violence Prevention and Safety. So I'm just going to get started. And I just want to say I've been very honored to be hosted by many First Nation and Aboriginal communities across Canada. Tanya and I, since I started in December of this past year, so for about 7 or 8 months, Tanya and I went across Canada. We held a number of focus groups, and we met with a number of Aboriginal communities and First Nation reserves. We actually visited them and held focus groups at various locations across Canada. So we will have an opportunity for discussion at the end, because the whole point of the webinar, it's really important to stress, is we are looking for recommendations to fine-tune recommendations and suggestions of what you would like to see in a toolkit. So NWAC recently developed a toolkit. It's called You Are Not Alone, and this was developed by my former colleague, Cherry. So we do already have a toolkit. I don't know if our toolkit's going to look very similar to it, but it does have a safety plan and an extensive resource list, which is really great. So this is our goal for Project Peace. And just to talk about, so what we learned in the First Nation communities and Aboriginal communities is domestic violence is a very serious issue, and it's impacted many communities. And there's a lot of historical background to that we learned from various communities, and so I'll be covering a lot of that in the PowerPoint. So to begin, I'm just going to start on the PowerPoint slide now. For Aboriginal women and girls, how that was developed. And we'll be talking about national focus groups for Aboriginal women and girls, and then talking about a conclusion. So like I said, at the end, we can have your questions. Okay, so to start, Project Peace, I kind of already talked about this. It's a unique 3-year project, which has been created with the goal of creating safety nets for Aboriginal women and girls to enable their success in life across all platforms. So there's a number of deliverables. One of them is developing a toolkit. So there will be a toolkit for Aboriginal women and girls, and there'll also be a toolkit for Aboriginal men and boys, because often Aboriginal men are excluded, but we want to ensure that they also have a toolkit. So Project Peace aims solely to promote safety and work on prevention, violence, and solution-based approaches for Aboriginal women and girls through engagement processes. And we really believe it's important to engage Aboriginal communities across Canada, so that's what we're doing. And experiences of violence, as you know, and you've heard a lot in the media, Aboriginal women are 8 times more likely to be killed than non-Aboriginal women. It's a serious issue in our communities. And rates of spousal assault are more than 3 times higher than non-Aboriginal women. And oftentimes, the spouse is not necessarily Aboriginal. And also, just so you're aware, NWAC also is a side project. We're also working on our own internal database on missing and murdered Aboriginal women. So that is work that we're also doing. So more severe and potentially life-threatening forms of spousal violence, 54% versus 37% compared to non-Aboriginal women. All right, and so what we did was we started this in probably end of March or beginning of April, and we developed on SurveyMonkey a survey that we distributed across Canada. So one survey was for Aboriginal women and girls, and the other survey was geared towards Aboriginal men and boys. So what we wanted to get was their perceptions or opinions on domestic violence and also issues of safety. So of total surveys, there was 539 respondents. So there's a breakdown, as you could see on the slide, of basically how many were English, 523, and 16 were French, and then 79 were identified as other and were disqualified from completing the survey. So we had a thing in our survey at the very beginning. If you were non-Aboriginal, automatically you could not complete the survey because we were just interested in collecting Aboriginal respondents. So that is the other on the survey part. So what we ended up with was 401 completed qualified survey results, which can constitute the great majority of attempted surveys. So yeah, it wrapped up around July when we just closed off our survey. So it was distributed across Canada. We had very great participation, which was really good. So I'm just going to quickly skip over some of this because you can read it later, but there was 4 options for people to identify their Aboriginal identity, and I explained the other category earlier. And gender identity. So majority were female. There was 19% that were male. And we also had a component in our survey option for people that were transgender, that identified as transgendered. So this slide is kind of self-explanatory as well, Aboriginal gender identity. So that's also, you can read that later. We also have a breakdown of the ages. So under 18 and between 18 to 30. So a large majority were middle-aged, between 31 to 55. So that was our majority of people that responded. I'm going to just quickly skim over some of the surveys. So it's going to move right into residency. So 52% were on reserve. It's hard to read these colors here. Is that correct? Oh, 52% were urban, that were residing in urban centers. So as you can see, there's a breakdown of the residency that we asked people in the surveys as well. And there's another slide that shows based on male, female, off reserve, on reserve, Métis settlement, urban center, and rural area. So just so you know, too, our focus groups were held both in urban and rural areas. So we tried as much as possible to have them like right on reserves. So some of the women's analysis with the survey, we talked about how long they lived in their community, and based on how long they lived in a community, it seemed to be that it increased their confidence in their levels of safety or their perceptions of safety in the neighborhood. So this is just some of the breakdown of how long people lived in their communities. And also we asked how safe you felt, somewhat safe or not safe at all. So that was a very important question. And yeah, a lot of this I'm going to skip over because you can read it later just to save on time. And we also asked a question in terms of overall level of satisfaction with policing in the community. Over half of the respondents were somewhat satisfied, while an almost equal amount felt quite satisfied and not satisfied at all. Um, and regarding assault, so respondents had the option to check all that applied to them if they were assaulted by their spouse or partner or immediate family or a stranger or other. So some of them were assaulted by multiple parties, so there was an option to check more than one. And this skips over some of this as well. Okay, I'm going to skip over to question 11. So the top three frequent categories of aggressors were spouse and partner, with 206 respondents having been physically assaulted by them, and also immediate family members were the second most common aggressor with a frequency of 181, while stranger was the third most common aggressor with a frequency of 113 incidents, and that's based on our survey results. We did ask a question about when asked how sensitive police are to problems when asked for help. The majority of respondents indicated that the police are helpful some of the time, 120, with 95 respondents indicating this question does not apply. So these responses suggest that almost 1/3 of respondents did not request assistance from the police when faced with a situation of aggression or assault, or those who did not were not entirely satisfied with the sensitivity of police. So a slim amount of respondents, 35, indicated that police were sensitive all of the time. And then based on what respondents feared the most with respect to their personal safety, the majority indicated break-ins, followed by physical assault by a stranger. Sexual assault was third, and theft of personal items also ranked highest among the highest respondents. And the least amount of respondents was in fear of sex trafficking, but that's still as a fear, and also other forms of violence such as police brutality and lateral violence in the workplace. So regarding concerns about threat of violence inflicted on those close to them, so there was a question about like who you feared most in your family of becoming harmed. So that was one of the questions as well. So a majority indicated they feared most for the safety of their children, with themselves being the second most concerned. Other people included friends, band members, and grandchildren. And we also asked regarding question 15 was regarding access to affordable housing in their communities. The majority of respondents felt they had access to affordable housing, 198, while the second most amount of people indicated they did not. A small amount of respondents were not sure. So we also asked in the women's survey was, what do you believe are the reasons that women cannot escape violence? So most respondents included more than one response because it was an open-ended question, and therefore each theme within a response was identified and coded into this analysis. So there were other questions that were open-ended. What do you believe are the reasons why women cannot escape violence? What do you think are the factors that contribute to family violence? And what do you think are factors, oh, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself here. What do you think are factors that contribute to family violence? And based on the survey, we did analysis of all the themes. So we came up with 9 themes that jumped out at us from the surveys. So there's 9 altogether, and I'll just be quickly going over them. State-imposed violence and federal policies. As you can see, the theme relates to issues such as police brutality, a justice system that prejudices Aboriginal women and peoples, the 60s scoop, Indian residential schools, and the Indian Act. And also another theme that came out was intergenerational and other traumas, like post-traumatic stress disorder. And this theme relates to intergenerational trauma, mostly resulting from Indian residential schools, and also numerous other types of abuse, foster care, and like I said, post-traumatic stress disorder. We had lack of supports and barriers, social, financial, and family. This theme relates to lack of social, financial, and family support and barriers that prevent women from avoiding and or escaping violence. Okay, and I was told to look more at the camera. Oppressive structures. So this theme relates to oppressive structures such as racism, misogyny, sexism, and heteronormativity. There was another theme, skills, education, and awareness. And this theme relates to skills such as parenting, financial, and marketable skills. And also self-perception and empowerment. This theme relates to issues such as low self-esteem, negative self-thought, fear, and the importance of empowering average women in order to avoid violence. We also had state-imposed violence and federal policies. Oh, I'm repeating myself here, so skip that one. Okay, yes, I went over the 9 themes already that came out from the survey. And we also talked about what do you think are the factors that contribute to family violence. So question number 19, most respondents included more than one response. And as a result, 3 themes proved to be the most prevalent in responses to question 19. So there was lack of supports and barriers. And some of these were an overwhelming majority responses were in regards to lack of social, financial, and family supports, as well as systematic and socio-economic barriers as factors that contribute to family violence. So some responses included poverty, no programming for abusers and those experiencing abuse, reliance on welfare, lack of healing programs, little access to food, basic needs, and issues with mobility and lack of housing and overcrowded housing. Yeah, just to let you know too, this PowerPoint will be available on our website later, and we will be, I just noticed there was a few slides that repeating themselves, so they'll be fixed. Okay, so talking about health, the third most overwhelming amount of responses related to health. These include issues such as mental health, addictions, disabilities, self-esteem, and so on. It's a common sentiment in responses that when poor health is present, average women are more likely to experience family violence. So some responses included drinking and drugs, stress, childhood trauma, no programs for personal healing, anger, mental health, depression, pain, and shame. Okay, so that covers the survey portion of the presentation. I'm going to be going into the review of the focus groups. Okay, so basically, as I said earlier, there was 18 focus groups that Tanya, my work colleague, and myself did. And so these are some of the following communities that we actually went out and visited. And they were Winnipeg, Manitoba, Selkirk, Manitoba, Vancouver, BC, Squamish, BC, Whitehorse, Yukon, Carcross, Yukon, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Shubenacadie, Nova Scotia, Montreal, Quebec. So we had 2 focus groups for Aboriginal men and women in Montreal, Quebec. So the focus groups are carried out in urban and rural settings, and it was really great participation. But to admit, there was very low participation in some areas from the men, but we had a good response from our women's focus groups. So the age group of the participants ranged in ages from 18 to 55 years of age. And we did have some youth attend our focus groups, which is really good to see too. And we always opened our focus groups with participation from an elder. And the focus groups ran between an hour and a half to 2.5 hours long. And again, as I said, it was really great for the Aboriginal communities to host us and welcome us in. And I felt really honored to be, allowed to be invited in. And I was honored to listen to the stories, personal stories, and to gain Aboriginal people's trust that they were able to share, such personal stories of domestic violence and how it affected them, which is really really sad to hear in some cases. And so the focus groups, it's very important to note that participants felt the need to discuss historical violence that still continues today before they want to talk about what needed to be in a toolkit. So many participants wanted additional or new resources and services to protect and stop the violence against Aboriginal women and girls. In some communities, we heard in some First Nation communities, there's actually not even any abuse or women's shelters in some communities. And many of the same issues that were discussed in the surveys also arose in the focus group discussions. And residential schools was a very common theme that through institutionalized method of punishing children has encouraged normalization of violence in our society and our culture, and which has had a very negative effect. So many focus group participants also identified drugs and alcohol abuse as one of the major causes of violent behavior in Aboriginal communities. So what NWAC does is we basically work with our provincial territorial membership associations, and there's 11 of them in the regions. So what we do is there's south, north, east, and west. And so basically that's kind of how we decided where we're going to go to hold each focus group. So if we didn't come out to your community in the past, like in the future, we could probably visit your community and hold this session. So in the south, we had some feedback on what people would like to see in a toolkit, and I would be really interested to hear from people that are on the webinar today what you think about the recommendations or suggestions, and we would really love to hear your own suggestions, because these recommendations need to be fine-tuned, and we're going to be putting them into a toolkit, like I said. And if you need an example of a toolkit, just check on our website. We do have the You Are Not Alone Domestic Violence Toolkit for Aboriginal Women. So in the south, we visited Manitoba, and some of the things we heard feedback from Aboriginal women was that they would like to have a purse of pocket-sized brochures with telephone numbers and emails to call or text when they need help. And also a suggestion was on signs and how do you spot a child predator, and also how to recognize pimps' grooming techniques for recruitment, and also how parents can protect their children from victimization. So these are some really good suggestions from Manitoba. And they also talked, some of their recommendations was how to protect yourself from internet predators who frequent chat rooms, and how to prevent kidnapping, how to, keep yourself safe while out during the evening, and also how to escape your kidnapper, and how to protect yourself from sexual violence. So the other suggestions for Manitoba was that we needed resources for domestic violence and where to go for help, and how to find crisis or counseling agencies and a list of safe houses, and also how to protect yourself from bullies at school. And moving on, our next focus group area that we visited was Yukon, and some of the suggestion in the north was that the toolkit needs to be visual and needs to be adaptable to small and remote First Nation communities, and that also a CD should be included. One suggestion was that some First Nation elders cannot read, so it's important to include audio, DVD, and also to remember to include modern technology when developing these toolkits. In the Yukon, they also said the toolkit must be responsive to the needs of people who live in the urban and rural communities and address various learning styles. So one of the comments I heard was just be aware of the reading level, make sure everyone is able to understand it. The Yukon suggested developing a process to educate youth, elders, leadership, and professionals to ensure education is available for all people, and that the use of technology was considered along with training opportunities and involvement of interested groups to expand. The focus group participants in Yukon stated they would like to see the toolkit to contain information that's actually useful in their community, or they said the community will not use these resources. And participants also stated they need actual resources and counseling and a hotline number and other things that people can access, for example, transportation. So what we heard in the West in BC was that First Nations need transition houses for domestic violence, and they need more visual learning, and because CDs have a big impact. And BC recommended that smaller First Nation communities be included in this initiative, and to make the toolkit more global, it should be shared with other agencies, not just NWAC. It needs to be shared in schools and shared in other professional domains. For example, transition houses and in every shelter. And another recommendation from BC was that it not contain too much information, just be like a one-pager. And that the toolkit should be available at every doctor's office, at every hospital around violence, violence against children, violence against women, violence against parents and grandparents. And then BC also talked about the cross-cultural component is really important as well. So in Nova Scotia, we had really excellent participation from Aboriginal women out there. And in Nova Scotia, they recommended in the East, they would like to see more programs like these. They need to be included. And they said regionalized toolkits versus more national toolkits needs to be tailored for each community. And Nova Scotia also commented that depending on the audience, is it going to be a frontline worker who is helping a woman trying to escape a violent situation, or is it going to be a person who's experiencing violence? So all these circumstances need to be included or considered when we are developing a toolkit. And things to include in a toolkit would be how to help someone who's leaving a violent situation and how can I support them. So for example, how do I support my friend or family member who is in a violent situation? For example, if you see signs of domestic violence in a family member or a friend, like how do you go about helping them? So it would be really important in the toolkit. Nova Scotia suggested to include an actual definition of violence and the different types of violence so people can easily identify them. In Nova Scotia, they commented also that we need to consider if the toolkit is going to be a community resource for helping people or helping yourself through a situation. So we need to educate people on the situation or the issue in order to stop violence from occurring. And we need to include information on how to respond in cases of disclosure of violence. Example, someone was sexually assaulted or you want to leave a domestic violence situation. How do you respond? And they also talked about including generalized information regarding going to police and making a report in cases of domestic violence, to include this information. And in Nova Scotia, they also talked about to be aware in case a woman wants to report a case of domestic violence that child welfare may possibly be involved and what to do in this situation. And in Nova Scotia, they suggested that we target the toolkit towards the high school ages from grade 9 to grade 12. And it's good to educate students what violence is to start at a young age. And a big issue, domestic violence is a big issue because there's so many angles, and how to include all topics of violence, example, lateral violence, bullying, workplace violence, sexualized violence, and domestic violence. So how do you address all of these issues? And we also, comment was, remember to include transgendered persons, and we need to focus on internalized racism and consider the cultural aspect and recognize the history of violence in Canada. So another suggestion was self-defense courses should be offered for free in the toolkit, or list the self-defense courses that are offered in your area. So these were some really great ideas from the East. They also talked about including inspirational messages or quotes in a toolkit, and to remember to consider your everyday reader, example, especially in legal jargon terms. They talked about modernized tips for getting out getting yourself out of situations, example, QR code. So a lot of people now with smartphones, you have a little box you can scan. I don't know about that. I'm not too technologically advanced, but this is one suggestion that came out of Nova Scotia. If you scan it with your phone, it will tell you where to go for help or assistance in cases of domestic violence. And use of an app that is inconspicuous that an abused person can download on their phone. And also to getting information into the schools regarding domestic violence at the junior high and senior high is very important. Another suggestion in the toolkit was to include a facilitator's guide, a trainer's guide on how to create roundtables or support groups or women's groups. And some feedback was that some toolkits are too basic or vague and include general facts, and then they're not really useful, and they kind of just lay around. So make sure that the toolkit's informative and useful. And some feedback from Nova Scotia was that the toolkit needs to be more specialized, include more preventative measures, and include information of where to go and have more resources. So that's my PowerPoint presentation. And so I'm pretty new to webinars, my first one. So yeah, so we're going to be answering some questions, or if anyone has any comments. If anyone's out there and you have any comments or questions or feedback, you can email in right now and we'll gladly respond. And we're just going to take a short break. All right, so we did have a few questions and I'm just going to briefly respond to them. So one of the questions is, when will the toolkits be done? We're aiming for the end of January 2016. And we're going to be actually going out and pilot testing the toolkit. So we will be visiting a number of communities again across Canada. So if you are interested in hosting Project Peace, email us and we can look into coming into your community. And as I said, NWAC is based on 4 regions, so south, west, north, or east. So we can look into that. So yeah, the pilot testing will probably be happening between January and March of next year, 2016. And we're looking to have a final toolkit based on all the input that we have after the pilot testing the toolkit. Final toolkit would be for the end of 2016. And just a reminder, we have the MINS webinar happening today at 2:30 Eastern Standard Time. So all you men and boys out there, I hope you join us for a discussion on domestic violence. And it is a serious issue in our communities. And we did have a question. Somebody would like a copy of the PowerPoint. We will be posting it on our NWAC website. So, and we are working on a translation. I was supposed to have a bilingual facilitator, but unfortunately, we weren't able to have a bilingual facilitator at the last minute. These are the 4 questions we talked about in the focus groups, and people had really great feedback and really great discussions on this. But in the MINS focus groups, we talked about question number 1 was, what does violence mean to you? And it was very a lot of people, responded it to on a personal level and based on their personal experiences. And question 2 was, what currently is missing from anti-violence initiatives? So we had some really great feedback on that as well. And question 3, what are some suggestions you have to make Aboriginal women feel safer in their communities? And question 4, as an Aboriginal male, what do you think is your role in assisting to eliminate violence in your Aboriginal communities? And question 5, in your opinion, what should be included in a toolkit for Aboriginal men and boys? So as you remember, we are developing a toolkit specifically for Aboriginal men and boys as well. And in the focus group for women, we talked about, there was 5 questions they answered as well. What does violence mean to you? Also, what is currently missing from anti-violence initiatives? And what are some suggestions you have to make Aboriginal women feel safer in their communities? And in your opinion, what should be included in the toolkit for Aboriginal women and girls? So um, those are the discussion questions we had in the focus groups. So I believe that is everything for now. So I'd like to thank you for listening to me and participating. And I was a little nervous, my first webinar, but I think it went okay. So I'm looking forward to your feedback. Feel free to email me at ggallagher@nwac.ca, and it's on the screen there. So, and call me and email me, and I'd love to hear your feedback. Hi. Thank you very much.